Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always. What fascinating corner of history are we exploring today?
Well, this time we're heading back to New York City on October 10th, 1854.
Ooh, the mid-19th century. A time of immense change and upheaval. What's our source material?
Just a single newspaper, actually.
A single newspaper, huh? You never cease to amaze me with the things you dig up.
Well, you know me, always on the hunt for those hidden gems, and trust me, this one's a gold mine.
All right, I'm intrigued. What kind of nuggets of history did you find in this 1854 paper?
Oh, you name it. We've got everything from detailed theater reviews and glimpses into local court cases to
To what? Don't leave me hanging?
to railroad accidents, even a peek into the secretive world of a political society.
Wow, a real cross-section of city life. It's amazing how a single newspaper can capture so much of the era.
Exactly. So as we go through this, our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to imagine ourselves as New Yorkers on this particular day.
I like it. What stories would grab our attention? What would we be talking about with our neighbors? And most importantly, what can we learn about the city and its people?
Sounds like a plan. Let's dive in.
Okay, let's start with something that caught my eye right away. A review of the opera at the Broadway Theatre. And get this, the critic is surprised that English opera hasn't really taken off in New York City.
Really? That's interesting, especially since the audience seemed to love it.
Yeah, they did. So it makes you wonder, right? Was there some kind of bias against English opera? Was Italian opera seen as more, I don't know, sophisticated?
It's possible. Maybe there was this sense that to truly appreciate opera, it had to be in Italian.
Right, like English just wasn't elegant enough or something. But hey, at least New Yorkers were clearly passionate about the art.
Oh, absolutely. And this review really goes all out praising the star soprano, Miss Louise Pyne. They describe her voice as certain, distinct, and brilliant as a flute, with a vibratory, trembling softness, like the warbling of a bird.
Wow, I mean, that's some serious praise right there. It makes you want to hear her for yourself.
I know, right? But unfortunately, not everyone fared so well in this paper.
You're talking about Signor Bernhardt, the new baritone.
Yeah, his voice wasn't exactly a hit with the critic.
Poor guy. It makes you wonder, though, what was it about his voice that didn't resonate? Was it just a matter of personal taste? Or were there some deeper cultural expectations at play?
Tough to say for sure, but it's definitely something to think about.
All right, enough about opera for now. Let's move on to another theatrical event that was causing a stir in the city. Miss Matilda Heron's debut as Parthenia in Ingomar at the Metropolitan Theater.
Oh yeah, this review really captures the excitement surrounding her performance. But the critic also points out how challenging this particular role is.
Yeah, playing Parthenia requires this, well, the critic says, utmost simplicity and naturalness, which apparently is a lot harder to pull off on stage than it sounds.
Right, and on top of that, another actress had just finished a super successful run playing the same character, so Miss Heron had some pretty big shoes to fill.
Talk about pressure. So what did the critic think? Did she measure up?
Well, they admit to having some doubts at first, but ultimately, they declare Miss Heron to be an actress of much inherent talent with a captivating stage presence.
So she won them over. But what about her co-star, Mr. Marshall, who played Ingomar?
Well, while acknowledging his talent, the critic takes issue with his tendency to break the fourth wall.
Break the fourth wall? You mean like talk directly to the audience?
Exactly. Apparently he did it quite a bit.
I wonder how the audience reacted to that. Today, it's a stylistic choice you see occasionally, but back then, it must have been quite jarring.
I bet. It really highlights how theatrical conventions and audience expectations have evolved over time. What was once considered avant-garde can become commonplace, you know?
Absolutely. It's a great reminder that what we consider normal or expected is often shaped by the time and place we live in.
Speaking of time and place, let's shift gears for a moment and take a look at the, shall we say, less glamorous side of city life.
Oh, you mean the railroad accidents we talked about earlier?
Yes, those. The accounts of those accidents really underscore the dangers that people faced in their daily lives, especially with, the rapid expansion of railroads happening at the time.
It's easy to forget how dangerous something as simple as crossing the street could be back then, especially with trains running through the city.
Exactly. The first accident, a tragic fatality, involved a steamer captain who was struck by a Hudson River Railroad train. The article goes into detail about the coroner's inquest and its findings.
It's heartbreaking to think about. And then there's the second accident, which happened on the New Haven Railroad. This one seems like it could have been prevented.
Oh, yeah, this one's a bit unsettling. It seems the switch tender was negligent, and that negligence caused a train to derail.
And derailment back then, that must have been terrifying. Was anyone hurt?
Yeah, the engineer was severely injured.
That's awful. These accidents, though different in nature, both raise an important question, don't they, about workplace safety and accountability.
Right. Who was responsible for ensuring the well-being of workers and passengers? It's a question that continues to resonate even today.
Absolutely. It reminds us that these kinds of tragedies often force us to confront systemic issues and really reevaluate our priorities as a society.
Well, speaking of systemic issues, how about we dive into the political landscape of 1854 New York City? Because this newspaper gives us a glimpse into the world of the, the know-nothings?
The know-nothings. Yeah, that's right. They were a secretive political society that was gaining influence at the time.
Exactly. And this article focuses on a meeting of their Grand Council and, well, let's just say things got a little heated.
Oh, why is that?
Well, they were deeply divided over the idea of nominating their own political candidates. Can you believe that?
Interesting. Why would they be so hesitant to get involved in politics? It seems counterintuitive for a political society.
Well, it seems the majority of the delegates actually opposed making any nominations. They were worried that open political engagement would jeopardize the order's secrecy and ultimately undermine their goals,
So what were they so afraid of? What were these goals they were trying to protect so fiercely?
That's the thing. The article hints at their anxieties, but it's not entirely clear. What we do know is that they were very concerned about the growing influence of immigrants and Catholics in American society.
So they were an anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic group.
It seems that way, yeah. They seem to believe that these groups pose a threat to the American way of life, whatever that meant to them.
And to maintain their secrecy and control, they were willing to go to extremes.
Oh, absolutely. This article describes the meeting as chaotic, with the president, like silencing dissenting voices and basically forcing through an amendment that required all members to vote for the Grand Council's chosen candidates.
Wow, talk about a power struggle. It's amazing how much these events from over 150 years ago still resonate with our current political climate, The fear of the other, the attempts to suppress dissent. It's like history repeating itself.
It really does make you wonder, are we any closer to resolving these tensions now than they were back then?
It really makes you think, doesn't it? But hey, it's not all doom and gloom in this newspaper. Amidst all the political drama, there are also these little glimpses into the everyday lives of ordinary New Yorkers.
Oh, absolutely. Like that heartbreaking story about the young boy who was accidentally shot.
Yeah, that one really got to me. It's a reminder of, how easily tragedy could strike back then. Especially with,
with the lack of safety regulations we have today.
Exactly. I mean, this guy, Dominic O'Connor, he was cleaning his musket, getting ready to go target shooting later. And,
Right.
He poured gunpowder into the gun and then tried to clear the nipple with a lighted cigar.
A lighted cigar? Oh, my gosh.
I know, right? It's hard to imagine anyone being that careless with firearms today. But sadly, it was all too common back then.
And tragically, in this case, an 11-year-old boy happened to be passing by at that exact moment.
Oh, no, that's awful.
Yeah, the poor kid was shot through both legs and taken to New York Hospital. But the article says his condition is very critical.
That's just heartbreaking. It makes you realize how vulnerable children were back then.
Absolutely. Speaking of children, there's also this amusing little report about two, what do they call them? Youthful scamps.
Youthful scamps? What did they do?
Oh, just your typical petty theft. Seems these two boys, Timothy Davis and George Wise, decided to take advantage of the distraction of a military parade.
To do what?
To pickpocket someone, of course.
Ah, classic. Did they get away with it?
Not quite. Officer Davis of the 11th Ward Police caught them red-handed while they were dividing up their loot.
What'd they get?
A quantity of small coin, the article says.
Pocket change, huh? Not exactly master criminals.
Right. But apparently they were part of a larger group of young pickpockets, some of whom did manage to escape with the rest of the stolen money.
It makes you wonder, what drove them to this? Was it poverty, lack of opportunity, or just, a bit of youthful mischief?
It's hard to say for sure, but it definitely provides a glimpse into the underbelly of city life back then, where, crime and poverty were often intertwined.
Yeah, it's a reminder that not everyone was enjoying the prosperity and progress of the time.
Exactly. And this theme of social inequality kind of continues in another article this one about a breach of promise case that ended with a rather hefty settlement.
Breach of promise. Oh, yeah, those were always interesting cases. For those who don't know, these were basically lawsuits filed when one party broke off an engagement.
Right. They were surprisingly common in the 19th century. And, they offer this really unique window into societal expectations around courtship and marriage.
Totally. So what happened in this particular case?
Well, a young woman named Anna Holding sued a man named Stephen Skinner for breach of promise and seduction.
Ooh, that's a double whammy.
It is. And the jury awarded Miss Holding $13,000, which was an enormous sum at the time.
Wow, $13,000. That's like a life-changing amount of money back then.
It was. So clearly, they believed she had suffered considerable damage both to her reputation and her future prospects.
Right. It really highlights the power dynamics between men and women in that era. A broken engagement could completely ruin a woman's life.
Absolutely. These cases often involve these complex legal arguments about consent and, reputation and financial compensation. And they reveal a lot about the anxieties and the evolving gender roles of the Victorian period.
It's fascinating stuff for sure. But hey, let's leave the courtroom for a bit and head across the Hudson River.
Across the Hudson? Where are we going?
To Hoboken, New Jersey. It seems that even back then, New Yorkers were venturing across the river looking for a little fun, or in this case, trouble.
Oh, what kind of trouble are we talking about?
Well, there's this article about a brawl involving some rowdies from New York who decided to cause a ruckus in Hoboken.
Rowdies? What did they do?
They assaulted an elderly man and then attacked another citizen who tried to intervene. Eventually, the police had to be called in to restore order.
Sounds like a typical Saturday night.
Right. Some things never change. But seriously, it does highlight this tension that often existed between urban centers and their surrounding areas.
No, absolutely. You have this bustling, growing city like New York, and then just across the river, these smaller, maybe more traditional communities, each trying to maintain their own identity.
It's like a microcosm of the larger social and cultural changes happening across the country, right?
Exactly. And speaking of change, how about we check in on the political scene in Hudson County, New Jersey?
Oh, what's going on over there?
Well, they're having their own Democratic convention, and it sounds like it was just as lively and contentious as any modern-day political gathering.
Let me guess, there was a fight over who would get the nomination.
You got it. This time, it was the nomination for county clerk that was causing all the drama. There were two candidates vying for the position, Anna Morell and George W. Cassidy, both from the First Ward.
Anna Moore. It's interesting to see a woman's name being put forward for a political position back then.
It is. But unfortunately, the article doesn't say who won the nomination.
Ah, too bad. So, what happened? Fists flying again.
Well, let's just say things got pretty heated. One delegate ended up striking another, and, well, there was an arrest.
Oh, come on. Really?
Yep, passionate politics, I guess.
Some things never change.
True enough. Now, for our final story from this section of the paper, we have a report on a trial that took place in the Hudson County Court of Oyer and Terminer.
The Court of Oyer and Terminer? That sounds serious. What was this one about?
Well, a man named Henry C. Gulick was on trial for the murder of his wife.
Murder? How did she die?
Poison. She died on March 8th from the effects of poison.
Poisoning. Those cases always seem to capture the public's imagination.
Don't they? There's something so, sinister about it. Anyway, the article doesn't go into specifics about the trial itself, but it does mention that Mr. Gulick was defended by these two prominent lawyers, I.W. Scudder and Mr. Kretchenist.
Yeah. What was the verdict?
Not guilty. The jury deliberated for a few hours and then returned a verdict of acquittal.
Wow. So he walked free. I wonder what the public reaction was to that.
I'm sure there were mixed feelings. After all, poisoning cases often rely on circumstantial evidence, right? Which can be really hard to prove beyond a reasonable doubt.
That's true. It's fascinating to think about all these events happening simultaneously. This brawl in Hoboken, the political convention, the murder trial. It's like a snapshot of a single day in the life of a city.
Exactly. And it reminds us that history isn't just about, dates and facts. It's about the lives of individuals, their interactions, their triumphs and tragedies. And this newspaper, with its mix of news and gossip and entertainment, it offers this incredibly vivid glimpse into that world.
It really is amazing the stories you can uncover in something as simple as an old newspaper.
It is. And it makes you realize, that even a seemingly ordinary day in the past was just as filled with drama and excitement and uncertainty as our lives are today.
Exactly. And it's not just the big events that shape history, right? It's the everyday experiences, the personal stories, the triumphs and heartbreaks of ordinary people that really create this rich tapestry of the past.
Well said. And speaking of personal stories, one that really resonated with me was this one about a young American pianist, Mr. Mason.
Mr. Mason.
Yeah, he had just returned from studying music in Europe, and there's this article about an upcoming concert he's giving here in New York.
Oh, interesting. So even back then, New York was attracting talented musicians from all over the world.
It seems so. And the article mentions that Mr. Mason had already performed to sold-out crowds in Boston, so, New York audiences were pretty excited to hear him play.
I bet. It makes you wonder what kind of music he played. Did his time in Europe, influence his style? Was he bringing back new ideas and techniques to share with American audiences?
Right. It's fascinating to think about. This was a time of such vibrant transatlantic cultural exchange, with artists and intellectuals constantly traveling back and forth across the ocean.
Seeking inspiration, new perspectives.
Exactly. And Mr. Mason's story is just one example of that dynamic flow of ideas that was shaping both American and European culture.
It's amazing how these individual stories can shed light on such broader trends and movements.
It is. And it makes you think about all the other stories that might be hidden within these pages, Like, what about the families of those involved in the railroad accidents we talked about earlier? How did those events impact their lives? We get these glimpses of tragedy, but we rarely hear about the aftermath, the ripple effects these events had on individuals and communities.
That's a really good point. It's so easy to get caught up in the headlines and the big events, but, behind each one, there's a whole network of human experiences. And those individual stories are just as important to understanding the past as the grand narratives of history.
Couldn't agree more. It's those individual stories that really bring the past to life,
Yeah.
They remind us that history isn't just a collection of facts and figures, but a story about real people.
Real people with real hopes and dreams and fears.
Exactly.
Well, as we wrap up our deep dive into October 10th, 1854, I'm struck by this sense of connection to the past. Like, we've journeyed from the grand stages of the opera to the gritty streets of a rapidly changing city. We've witnessed political intrigue, personal tragedies, and just the everyday lives of New Yorkers who are, grappling with the same kinds of challenges and opportunities that we face today.
It's amazing how much we share with these people from the past, isn't it?
It really is. And, as we close, I can't help but think back to the know-nothings and their anxieties about the changing face of America.
Yeah, they were certainly a product of their time.
They were. But do you think any of their concerns, resonate with today's political climate? Have we, as a society, really moved beyond the kind of anxieties and prejudices that fueled their movement?
That's a tough question. I think it's safe to say that those anxieties and prejudices, unfortunately, still exist today. But I also think we've made some progress in terms of understanding and addressing them.
I hope so, because it seems like that fear of the other and the desire to preserve a particular vision of society are themes that continue to echo throughout history.
They do, which is why it's so important to keep learning from the past, to keep asking these tough questions so we can hopefully build a more inclusive and equitable future.
Well said. So, to all our listeners out there, I encourage you to keep exploring the past. You never know what insights you might discover or how those discoveries might shape your understanding of the world today.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep digging, keep questioning, and keep those deep dives going.